The Tom Woods Show, episode 723.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you're like me, you get more email than you can cope with, and you frankly don't know what to do about it. Well, do what I do. Use SaneBox to declutter and get your life back. Check it out at SaneBox, SaneBox.com/Woods. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. We are responding to an article today. Those are always fun. Article responses. There's an article that's making its way around the internet. It's called Austrians Are Wrong Again. And it is a response to a piece by Jonathan Newman, who has been on the show before as a panelist on one of the episodes. And it's an article that he wrote on some of the insights that the Austrian school has. And this other person is saying, no, these are not valid insights, or they're not uniquely Austrian, or Jonathan Newman doesn't know what he's talking about, whatever. So this started to spread around, and I had a number of people say, hey, you should answer this. So I thought, what the heck. Now, again, not because it's, let's say it's the best article in the world, but because if people are reading it, I want people to know what the answer to it is. So I'm going to be linking, of course, to the article, to Jonathan Newman's initial piece. All that stuff will be at tomwoods.com/723, of course. And joining me to try and take a crack at this is Professor Jeff Herbener, who is the chairman of the Department of Economics at the outstanding Grove City College. He's also associate editor of the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics. And being a cool guy and really smart, naturally he also teaches at libertyclassroom.com, my adult enrichment, learn how to smack down all your friends website. Jeff Herbener, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Great to be here.
So let's go through this. I could have had Jonathan Newman on. It's his article, but I thought, well, I don't know his number, and I know yours. So that's basically how things get done around here. Okay, so obviously we're linking to this at tomwoods.com/723, linking to the original article and to this response. And it's, the site that the response is on is by and large a free market site. It looks like more or less a Chicago school site, if I had to classify it. This person describes himself as a neoclassical economist. So it's not like we're talking to outright leftists who could never be persuaded to listen to reason. But in a way, that annoys me even more. There's no reason for somebody like this to have misconceptions about the Austrian school or to attack us or whatever. So let's go through these 5 points that Jonathan Newman raised and see what the anti-Austrian answer is, and then see what the anti-Austrian answer of Jeff Herbener is, if people are able to follow anything that I'm saying here. All right, here we go. First is the complaint, a common Austrian complaint, that quantitative models miss the nature of human action. Now, that's the way he describes the Austrian criticism. And here's what Jonathan Newman had indeed said. He says, you can't even do basic math with people's preferences for two reasons. Preferences are subjective and preferences are ordinal. You can't measure or compare something you can't observe, and you can't do math with ordinal figures. Adding second place to third place doesn't get you fifth place or first place. It gets you nowhere, which is exactly where mainstream macro is today. So the criticism of that we get from this author is, and again, we don't know the name of this author. It's The Unregulated Economist, whatever that means. And the response to this is that this is a typical Austrian misunderstanding. Quantitative models used by mainstream economists are based on preferences. The preference relationships used by mainstream economists are ordinal. We use utility functions because we have proved theorems about what properties preference relations need in order to be represented by a utility function. If a preference relationship can be represented by a utility function, it means anything that is true for the utility function will be true for preferences. For example, If I prefer oranges to apples, then the utility function gives me higher utility for oranges. The utility function is arbitrary. All that matters is that we are representing the underlying preferences. Another thing we don't do is add the third best and the second best and claim that it is first best. That is a straw man. Well, obviously, Jonathan wasn't literally saying they do that. We do, however, take combinations of bundles and can rank them as long as the preferences have certain properties. For example, if I prefer a bundle of oranges to a bundle of apples, then I will most likely prefer a bundle of half oranges and half apples to a bundle of only apples. To argue that mainstream economists are adding ranked bundles the way he represents it shows a complete lack of understanding of mainstream economics. So, Jeff Herbener, does Jonathan Newman or the Austrian school, do they have a complete lack of understanding of mainstream economics? There's a meatball right over the plate for you.
Yeah, well, by the way, I should say that just as a point of context, that Jonathan Newman's piece is actually a response to another piece by someone in a mainstream publication. And so Jonathan isn't really sort of laying out here a contrast between the Austrian and the neoclassical approaches. He's actually responding to another writer who had criticized the Austrians. But anyway, with that said, what Jonathan, it seems to me that a sort of neutral and unbiased reading of Jonathan's claim it is in fact correct. What he says is that we can't do basic math with people's preferences, with the preferences of real human beings. And this I don't think is controversial. I think it's quite accepted on all sides that the bundle ranking and the utility functions and so on are not the preferences of real human beings. They're simply mathematical organizations. They're just mathematical iterations. And of course, if you have a mathematical iteration of bundle assessments, then of course it has certain properties under certain assumptions. But as Jonathan's pointing out, this has nothing whatsoever to do with real people's actual preferences. Real people don't rank all the possible bundles of all the possible goods that could come into their hands of value. They have ends, and they select means that are suitable to the attainment of these particular ends, and they acquire the goods and value them according to the particular ends that particular means achieve. And so really this, I think Jonathan's claim stands just as he stated it. Jonathan, once again, is not trying to make a contrast here or a comparison between the Austrian approach and the neoclassical. He's responding to another author who has written that the Austrians have nothing of use to say. And so he's just pointing out that, well, we do, in fact, have something useful to say, and it's a truth about real people's real actions. By the way, the critic here, he underplays what the conditions are that are necessary for the representation theorems of neoclassical economics to be correct. I mean, he just gives us this example of how there has to be a kind of consistency, transitivity, let's say, in bundle rankings. But actually, in order for the bundle preference rankings to be mapped onto a utility function, the bundle rankings have to be complete, which would mean that for every possible configuration of all the different goods, each taken as a separate set or bundle, a person has to be able to say, I prefer one bundle to another, or I prefer the second bundle to the first, or I'm indifferent between the two. And real people don't do this, and therefore this is just a mathematical, it's just a mathematical iteration, really.
Let's look at the second one. In the second point is that Jonathan is making is that the micro-macro separation is baseless, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Now, first of all, not everybody who listens to the show is was an economics major. So Just tell people what micro and macro deal with, and then we'll get back to this.
Right. So what Jonathan's referring to, the micro, macro, and mainstream economics. Microeconomics, there is this attempt to ground the analysis in the behavior of economic agents, as we've discussed. So they're trying to value goods and trying to act and achieve ends and so on. In macroeconomics developed, at least under Keynes's tutelage, by looking just at correlations of aggregate data sets. So here we just get something like an aggregate demand Yes, we all agree there's a law of demand. The demand curves always slope downward to the right, but we don't know the elasticity of demand. And that's where we need a model to be able to test the data. And we need a model because the data is complex, many different causal factors that generate the result. And so we have to disentangle them somehow quantitatively or statistically.
But therefore, we need to look to the real world to find out which is true. So again, I just don't. I wish he'd give me an example, because then then we could see maybe what he's talking about. We need to. I mean,
I guess he could be saying that if we can invent any sort of model we want, then we can start. One person could propose a model with an upward sloping demand curve, although he denies that they do that, and one with a downward sloping demand curve or whatever. Then we could look at the real world. I mean, these models would all be logically internally consistent. And then we can look at the real world and
okay, that's a charitable way of
ones
yeah. But I wish we could have David Gordon talk about this. Logic does not lead to truth.
Well,
I'm pretty sure it does, actually.
Yeah, I think it's, to put the best reading on this, he might just be referring to the fact that, of course, you need to have, in order to ensure that you reach true conclusions, you have to start with true premises. And then logic would, in fact, lead to truth. So
now there you're being too generous.
Yeah, he may have that in mind when he says that. But this goes right back to what you said before, that this is one of the advantages of the Austrian approach, is that we start with reflective facts about real human action that seem to be acceptable as premises for our arguments.
This is going to be fun because he claims in a minute that everybody knew there was a housing bubble. So we'll get to that after thanking our sponsor. Let's see how much like me you are. Every day email pours into your inbox, and you get to about 80 to 85% of it. But every day that 15 to 20% is still there, eating away at you, calling your name at night. And you know you're never, ever going to be able to get back to all of it, and it's frustrating and soul-crushing. Well, I'll tell you something. I emancipated myself from that pit of despair with sanebox.com. I use SaneBox, and I can't live without it. It sorts out my important email from my less important email. It also gives me the option to get certain emails resent to me on days when I'm going to have time to deal with them. So I can clear all my emails out every single day and say, I have reasserted control, baby. Well, check it out at sanebox.com. That's sanebox.com/woods. Get a 14-day free trial. And if you decide to stick with it, you get an automatic $25 Tom Woods Show discount. So head over to sanebox.com/woods. Okay, before we go on, we've got numbers 4 and 5 to tackle, but you want to go back to something in point number 2.
Yeah, I wanted to mention on this Lucas critique, the author mentions this as an important aspect of introducing micro foundations to macroeconomics.
Yeah, but hold on. Let's make clear. I mean, not everybody knows who Lucas is. We're talking about Robert Lucas.
Mm-hmm. Right, the Chicago economist. By the way, he was also at Carnegie Mellon, so he was a local guy for a while to me.
Okay.
But anyway, so the Lucas critique actually says that if we have an econometric model that we've used past data to estimate the parameters, we shouldn't think that the parameters will be stable in predicting the future effect from a policy change that we implement. It just might be that implementing a policy will change the way people behave and therefore change the parameters. And actually, it seems to me that this is a rather more Austrian-oriented point to make. We could generalize this into the way the Austrians think about this. As Mises like to point out, one of the problems in doing functional analysis in economics is that there are actually no constants. And so we can't even set up functional equations because we can't divide the phenomena into variables that are changing in constant parameters that don't change. And so I think he's just not, he's off the mark a little bit on this Lucas critique. or at least he opens himself up to the other objection that Jonathan Newman doesn't even bring up against the use of mathematics in economics.
Nice. Let's hold off on the housing bubble thing, because that is number 5 after all. But you know what? Look, it's my show. We're going to go out of order. Let's go to number 5. Austrian economists did predict the housing bubble, and one of his answers is everyone knew there was a housing bubble. Now let's just pause for a minute. James Galbraith said that when it came to the financial crisis, that maybe a dozen or so out of the something like 15,000 professional economists saw that coming. So that's a little different from everyone, right? That's a much smaller percentage, I would say. Like, if I wouldn't round that up to 100%, 12 out of 15,000. But then he says Alan Greenspan and the Fed created a housing bubble on purpose. And so, in other words, everybody knew there was a housing bubble. Now, of course, if everybody knew there was a housing bubble, there would be certain consequences to that. They did this because they handled the bursting of the last bubble so well, they assumed they could handle the housing bubble as well. Therefore, they thought the benefits of the bubble would outweigh the negatives. This wasn't some secret only the Austrians had access to. Moreover, there were many people at the Fed who were predicting it to cause a recession. I think that's an awkward way of saying who were predicting that it would cause a recession. What's your immediate response to that?
I've actually never heard this claim before, that there were people in power who understood this, and they assumed that when the bubble did burst, they could handle the fallout. I don't know of any evidence. I've never read anybody making this claim. Or
what's the citation?
The one that came to mind when I first read this was Tyler Cowen. I think he had said Bob Murphy took him to task for saying right before the bubble burst that as some of the Austrians were predicting that it was in fact a housing bubble. He said, well, no, it wouldn't be a housing bubble, because if it were a bubble, then this would happen and that would happen and that would happen. And that's exactly what did happen once it burst, right? These consequences did in fact occur just as the Austrians had said, just as Tyler Cowen understood would be implications of the Austrian.
Yeah, in fact, I remember that piece. I'm going to link to that at tomwoods.com/723. But that was a beautiful, beautiful thing. So
right. Yeah, it was a great piece. So I'm not really sure. I don't know. I wish we had a citation from him so we could read, who it is he's citing that understood this, and we're saying, hey, let's just let the bubble go ahead and burst. And
and not only that, but I mean, who was it? Ben Bernanke said that the fundamentals of the economy are strong and the housing market is perfectly sound. He did not at no time was there anything in Bernanke's public statements that indicated he believed that there was a bubble.
No,
quite to the contrary.
Absolutely right. Yeah,
the fundamentals were strong. It was a response to fundamentals. It was not a bubble. All right, let's go back then. Then he says. Now, I don't want to make fun of his grammar, but he says, if you want to see how truly poor of thinkers Austrians are, that's just a terrible. You get an F. Just consider this thought experiment. Austrians claim that markets are perfect. Okay.
Wow.
He says in parentheses, not in the sense that you learn in Micro 101, but that markets do not make mistakes.
That's just wrong on the face.
Yeah, we've gotten half a sentence in, and you have to comment. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the advantages again of the Austrian view is that there's uncertainty of the future, and of course, mistakes are made all the time by entrepreneurs, and it's just that in the market, it's a self-correcting process. So there's a process where the entrepreneurs who make mistakes are decapitalized, and the entrepreneurs who are superior in their foresight gain capital funding, and then the market muddles through. But I don't know of any Austrian who claims the markets are perfect.
Yeah, but then what he's going to say is Austrian economics has lost in the marketplace of ideas. So either Austrian methodology is a failed experiment because markets do not make mistakes, or the market is imperfect, which means Austrians are wrong. Either way, Austrians need to move on. There have been so many advancements to mainstream economics since Human Action was written that it is embarrassing they are still clinging to it. I don't have the sense that he understands any of the contributions human action made, or he understands the Austrians or Mises at all from anything that's written here. But Jeff, what do you think about this claim that since Austrians aren't the dominant school, that this shows that either we're stupid heads and obviously wrong, or that our philosophy that markets are always correct. And by the way, as if the academic job market is a free market.
Right.
Right. I mean, hello.
Yeah. No, that's exactly the difficulty, right? I mean,
for a minute, because I found it took me 2 seconds to find a list of major experts who resolutely denied the existence of a bubble. Resolutely denied it. And I mean, these are top-notch people who are, widely published